in that area. And so when you're talking about, coordinating, I think that's also important to understand. Also this notion as well that what is the actual job and role of a union? It's actually not to, in my opinion, to support legislative and legal action that they deem generally would be applicable to all workers and moving forward. It's actually to respond and to work for those specific members as it concerns even down to the level of that contract, okay, or that employer. And so when you think about it that way, and in regards to how our legislative and legal interests are actually informed, they are informed by our members. And I think that that's why, to maybe jump us off a little bit, I think that, for context here, when we're talking about something like third category position, right? Well, from our perspective, how is it that a labor union who looks at their workforce that they represent, and for example, the UPS context, well, we have to go to the negotiating table and negotiate about the use of personal vehicles, the use of gig economy workers. Well, how are we supposed to take a position in collective bargaining that actually in other places, these aren't employees, that they should not afford the same rights and protections, whether it be at the federal level or in any other state that we should actually advocate for in this case. And so when you think about that, you can understand why our interests may not be necessarily aligned with the national or otherwise opinion in regards to how we should view this issue. And when you think about that too, when you're thinking about how that is used to encourage and inspire others, well, from that same perspective, I believe I'm in complete agreement with that, the concept that workers already have power. In many cases, I believe that they have just lost faith in the institutions that prevents, well, not just it prevents them, but that essentially holds them back from engaging and sometimes participating and wanting to be involved because they don't necessarily see the direct benefit. But I think that's why the approach is to go back to, first and foremost, showing the tangible benefits that you can get. And you do that through what I was just referring to, which is let us try to receive the benefits, whether it be working conditions, whether it be hours, whether it not be anything in regards to working condition hours at all. Let us try to achieve those benefits for a group. And then we can take that collective bargaining agreement, for example, and then use that in addition to the advocacy that's happening on ground by organizers to truly show people that we can actually make a change. When you're talking about, again, UPS, in my perspective, there's no way that we're going to be able to approach Amazon without first and foremost showing what a collective bargaining agreement can do in that space. And as it concerns UPS, those workers are doing the same exact work, particularly at the driver level. And in one case, you have drivers that make, in many cases, over $100K a year, have full benefits and have many other protections as it concerns their job security. While on the other hand, you have at-will employment that turnover is almost, I think, 150%, which is a ridiculous rate. $15 an hour in some areas to do that same work. And many cases, I won't get into it much, but you'll see that the fissured workplace also creates a situation where many times when companies force those workers to violate overtime, state protections or meal and rest break state protections, that they're not even able to receive the recourse because of the fissured workplace leave the liability at the feet of perhaps another person that we should also just consider a misclassified worker. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. But I think that, ultimately that's what I'm going to try to focus on today. And I want to try to bring as much of a practical approach as I can. I think that another benefit that I have being inside council is that I do get an opportunity in any case to interact with workers on a daily basis. I get calls directly from our member. And so a lot of times I get on the ground information that is always not necessarily make itself into the courtrooms, otherwise into these conversations. And so I'm going to try to, even though I am an attorney, I'm going to perhaps not be so much of an attorney today. So.
Hello. Okay, that works. Just want to start by thanking everyone for being here. Thank you to Diana for hosting this incredible panelists. Really an honor to be on this panel with y'all. Also really wanted to thank Sanjay and the whole team for all their incredible work to put this shit together. Can we give a round of applause for them? And I'm always I don't know, uncomfortable is probably the word, being in rooms like this now, right? Because as a graduate student at the University of Michigan, I dreamed of being where I'm sitting right now. And I did everything I possibly could to get to that place where I could share the work that mattered to me with people to whom I thought it would matter as well. Typical first gen stuff. I didn't get just one PhD, I got two because I thought that would get me an academic job. I published academic articles, I published public articles, I interviewed workers, and like the vast majority of us, I also struck out on the job market 2 years in a row. And it's bizarre to me and a weird feeling that I had to essentially get kicked out of academia to find my way to panels like this. So I also wanted to start by saying to every grad student worker out there, every adjunct, every non-tenure track lecturer, professor, I am with you always, and I'm sorry that you, like me, we're sucked into a system that frankly lied to us. And I'm here to tell you that there is a life outside of it, right? So how did I get into this work, right? I think similar to what our fellow panelists say, it was very personal. 11 years ago, I was a temp working, 12-hour days in a warehouse in Southern California, watching the world crumble around me. Our family, to our minds, had done everything right as a first-gen family, right? To achieve the American dream. And I think there was a short time where our family felt like we had achieved it. That all went away in 2008. And it was a slow burn. It didn't disappear at once. It was a very kind of years-long process, where we eventually lost the house that I grew up in, lost any savings that we had, lost a lot of dignity and friends and community along the way. And I remember, trying to kind of confront that and figure out what to do with that. I didn't know that I would make it back to grad school at that point. And when I finally did, years later, it was really because of the salary, right? It was more than I was making at restaurants. It was more than I was making at factories and the warehouses. But I, thought that like I would also get to do some cool work while I was there. But when I got back to academia, and I was like, oh, thank God, I'm on a campus again, right? I can forget about all that shit. I couldn't forget about the guys in the warehouse. I couldn't forget about my family. Something had irrevocably broke for me in my relationship with academia. When I would write papers, I used to always imagine my professors as the intended audience. And now when I tell this to journalists I work with, because I still do it, whenever I'm conducting an interview or I'm being interviewed, I ask folks like, who is just outside of the frame for you? Who is your like audience sitting watching you? And I always picture my family, and I picture people that I've worked with in the past. If their faces are confused, I know I'm not doing a good enough job of explaining what I'm saying, right? And I try to answer the questions I can tell that they have in their heads, right? And so that is why I started the podcast while I was still in graduate school, because all of this was, happening at the same time. I could tell how depressed my dad was for having had and lost this infinite thing that he had come to the United States for, having grown up in a lean-to shack in Tijuana, being separated from his siblings when he was 8, brought over separately, put in foster care, essentially living like a live-in slave for a lot of his young life, to become a citizen, to get married, to own a home, and to have it all seemingly go away. That was really weighing on our family. And I joke now that I started the podcast almost as a ruse to get my dad to talk about that, because he wasn't, and it was destroying my parents' marriage, which I always thought was rock solid. It was hurting their relationship with us. They stopped going to their church, so we lost that sense of community. It was really tough. But then when I turned the recorder on, he opened up about his life for 3 hours, and we had one of the deepest conversations that we've ever had. There was something about the prospect of other people hearing it, and there was something about just having my attention solely focused on him and saying, like, there's no right or wrong answer here. It's you are the story. Like, I want to know more about you. And I realized later how much that meant to him and to me, and how much it means to all of us. Because I remember, now that I'm in media, sitting in the living room of a home that we would eventually lose, watching the news, watching anchors and politicians and Chamber of Commerce bootlickers like constantly praise this economic recovery that seemed to just be passing us by. And so I was like, well, clearly they're not talking about us. There must be something wrong with us. And I realized, and I remembered from talking to guys at the warehouse, at the restaurants and retail jobs that I worked at, that we all feel that, right? And in fact, that's not by accident, right? And so I've been reminded time and time again, every time I've interviewed workers for my podcast, the Breaking Points, the Real News, for my book, just how much of a gift it is to give that attention to one another and to say to one another, you matter, right? Your life story matters, and you have a lot to teach, right? You have a lot of experience that's worth hearing and sharing and preserving. Just reminding people what this economic and legal and political system tries so hard to squash out of us, right? Because that is a critical component of an exploitative political economy, is you have to convince the most exploited people that they deserve it and that they don't deserve better, right? And in many ways, the primary task of organizing is to turn that the other way, right? And to get people to realize, if they are going to take it within the power that they already have, they're actually going to take that within their own hands together. They need to first realize that they deserve to fight for something better, and that this isn't the only way things have to be. So that's a kind of long rambling personal story about how I got into this work. What I would just say really quickly about what I think is one of the most immediate concerns when it comes to law is a very obvious point, but I think after watching and listening to the great talks over the past 24 hours, I realized that it's really important for everyone here and everyone who's not here. You need to hear what this looks like on a day-to-day basis. You need to see the faces that this impacts. This isn't just disciplinary debates, right? This isn't just legal theory, right? This is real pain. This is real. This is turning people's lives upside down. This is squashing ongoing existing attempts to build worker power, to counteract the corporate pillage that we have been living with for so long. And what I see on a day-to-day basis with the workers that I talk to every day is just how apparent it is that there's the access to the law and the time it takes to seek accountability is so goddamn unequal. And the bosses know that, and they use it to their advantage, right? If a worker on a picket line breaks the law, say they punch a scab in the face, they get arrested and charged quickly. Their life gets turned upside down immediately. And in fact, it can hurt the strike itself in pretty rapid succession. However, if a business, a small business or a more multinational corporation, if they break the law, if they illegally retaliate against workers for supporting unionization efforts, or for just speaking out about unsafe working conditions, or if they are discriminated against, if bosses fire people without any just cause, if they lie to workers about unionization during captive audience meetings, if they close down entire stores like Chipotle and Starbucks and G&D Integrated in Illinois have, if tenured professors sexually harass and abuse advisees and hold their career advancement captive as a form of blackmail, and even if other faculty and administrators are fully aware of that professor's actions, it takes a goddamn eternity and a lot of resources to get close to holding anyone accountable for that. And in many ways, those of us who are trying to provide some help the way that the law moves so slowly, it's like telling chickens in a chicken coop with a fox in it, we'll be back in 3 years. That is the reality that I hear when I talk to workers who are in this situation every day, right? And we all got a crash course in that this past week, right? That temporality, the way that the law creates this temporality that can be weaponized by the bosses against workers was on full display with Howard fucking Schultz testifying in front of Congress and being able to say with a straight face, Starbucks has not broken the law once. Bullshit. Like I've talked to worker after worker after worker who has said, like, we made our desire for a union known immediately. Our schedules started getting messed with. They started underscheduling us because if you at Starbucks, if you average less than 20 hours a week, you are no longer eligible for the healthcare. So that's a way that they can retaliate and weaponize that against workers. They can close entire unionized stores like they did in Ithaca, New York, like they did in Seattle, like they did in Washington, D.C. and say, no, it's for business reasons. It has nothing to do with the fact that they said they wanted a union. And we as journalists have to sit there and call these things alleged for like 2 fucking years. Sorry, I'm getting into it. For like 2 years when we all know what we're looking at. We are looking at a corporate crime wave happening right in front of us, but we are hamstrung by the very same things that are hamstringing workers. And I just wanted to make this point very clear, because if we all have a vested interest in helping that movement, in doing whatever we can to help working people band together, realize they have power to change their circumstances and to not just accept what this power structure gives them, we need to understand, like what that translates to on the ground and what we can do to show support, because I really want to impress upon people the temporalities, the unequal temporalities, the unequal access to the law. It is having the intended effect for the bosses. This time last year, Starbucks, we all were cheering on the union wave. We were seeing store after store after store from Maine to Hawaii say they wanted to file for a union election. And I think there were like maybe 70 new stores that filed this time last year. By August, there were less than 10. Because Starbucks knows it can keep breaking the law as much as it wants, as long as it stamps out people's desire to take that step to say, we're going to unionize too, because they see what's happening to their colleagues. They see how we all forget about them after the initial news breaks, right? That's when it really matters. That's when the screws start turning. After everyone said, hey, this store in Baltimore is going to unionize, great. 3 months go by, the workers get fired. Their schedules get messed with, right? They get surveilled. And like Starbucks knows that, and it is using it. Okay, I'll shut up.
All right. Okay, so I think one question, one thing that we debate endlessly, I think in academia, is, is the law good or bad? Is the law a tool of repression? Is it a tool of empowerment? Do those questions even make any sense? I asked you to start by talking about, where you see there being equal challenges. But I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, especially, in the work that you do when you're talking to workers, how do they understand the law and talk to them about the law? Can you resolve our debate once and for all, or is it just a ridiculous debate to begin with?
Sure. I think I could say that again, and this may be my wife, I'm not a lawyer, but no, do not sound like a lawyer, but I think that particularly unions need to stop waiting on the law. And quite frankly, we need to push collective action. That's what corporations do. When we're talking about the cost of business, then workers should have to take the same approach. And whether it be looking at strategies, on how to empower workers and still limit the financial liability that we may incur, that still may have the action or the direct results that we may need to have, that may be something that we need to consider, particularly in consideration of what they're doing with Glacier. That is something that we all have to think about, and I will note that on that, I don't think that that's also something that employers should be too happy about, because I can certainly say that unions also have the ability to file tort law claims in state court. And there's a lot more members out there that suffer from the same actions that would otherwise be governed under the NRA, as what corporations may think that they can begin to levy against unions. And so, that being said, I think that, I appreciate everything that you said from that standpoint, because I think that goes also just inspiring workers to understand that they have the power to push the public needle, to push the PR needle, which ultimately is the best way to impact legislators and in the legal adjudication system, in my mind. Now, I guess I can talk a little bit about, again, I think a cost of business. I want to explain a little bit, the implications of what I call the double filtering system, and I make, no qualms about it. Talking about Amazon, talking about the delivery service provider scheme. I'm talking about FedEx. I'm talking about the ISP, independent service provider scheme. I'm talking about at our ports where we have what they call a second driver scheme. And in essence, what we have to understand is that the first act that arguably is what creates this issue is that you have a company that creates a misconception or provides misinformation to an individual that makes it lead them to believe that they are actually going to be an independent operator. And essentially what happens is they elicit this person to provide a service to them, being the lead firm. And within that service contract, the first thing that they do is, I should say within the contract is all of the different schemes that we believe, particularly in the antitrust space, should be evaluated and not considered as it concerns labor harms, whether it be exclusive contracting, whether it be non-competes. With non-competes, again, we appreciate certainly the ban on all non-competes, but it also should address the reality that non-competes for independent contractors should also consider that their ability to be able to service other lead firms concurrent to the service, not just post-fact after the fact. The exclusive contracting, whereby a person is an independent contractor, but the contract actually requires them to service the lead firm 365 days a year, 7 days a week, at any opportunity that they say, okay? The no poaching aspect of it, whereby then the lead firm will set up 20 of these servient firms and then also prevent workers from those firms from working or moving to other firms, all that also service that same lead firm. So all of these things also add together, and we must understand that that is just the first step of the Fisher workplace. And quite frankly, we always do these individuals as independent contractors, but that's because we also do not have any rights for managers or supervisors under labor law. And when you have that also in conjunction with the reality that misclassification is not a standalone violation under labor law, we get a situation where this person can be coerced into starting up this company, taking on liability, immense liability just to start up the company, only then also be instructed post-fact the agreement to actually serve the lead firm to now go hire employees, direct employees under your name. So that when we under the contract impose the timeliness requirements, for example, in a delivery situation, and your workers dealing with the normal traffic, dealing with normal other circumstances that otherwise, again, lead them to maybe have to be out an additional hour, be out that additional 2 hours. And now we need overtime pay, but from the lead firm position, it's actually a matter of we can actually deduct from your pay because you did not deliver within the time requirements under the service contract. So then what does that individual now do that was misclassified manager or supervisor from the get-go, who is now facing all of these employee suits that they actually had no ability to control from the onset? And we like to think about this in the joint employer context, but quite frankly, there's no co-determination happening at all. There's no co-determination happening. And so quite frankly, even as we're looking at our joint employer analysis, we still have questions there. And we're going to reply what the board is doing there and looking at the Brown and Fair standard and what they can do to revitalize that. But that is also still a potential pitfall. And so when you're talking about that, and then you're also talking about the surveillance aspect, I can tell you practically speaking, what do you happens when an employer comes to you and say, well, they've got an input, when can I actually facilitate collective action conversation? When can I actually talk about the union? When in my truck, there's an inward facing camera. On my phone, there's a GPS tracker and they can also hear what I'm saying. When I approach the facility, I'm under normal surveillance. And guess what? Even when I'm in the break room, they may use something such as a heat map to discern when we may have even just 5 potential union supporters meeting. And then we can thus then send a supervisor in there for that random check of the break room at that time to further intimidate these individuals. And so again, it's not that they are not aware, they are aware of their rights to take action in any case. They're intimidated and they are aware. Employers make it their point to make them aware, and they're not afraid of violating law. It is a cost of business. It's a cost of business. They are perfectly fine, and I should go back and also say, also within those contracts that I'm referring to, many cases are provisions that obligate the serving firm to follow any legal defenses or legal direction of the lead firm. And so what does that do in the context of now an employee suit that we're speaking of that may involve some FLSA violations or state violations? Well, it causes a settlement. So in that settlement context, what happens is a serving firm, that so-called independent business, goes bankrupt, and the company actually just ends up mitigating the liability that they would have already occurred had they been abiding by the law and doing things in the right way. And so, I'd like to say that again, that, and look at that on top of the surveillance aspect of it. That is why we have to, in my opinion, be able to look employees in the face, show them where we can present those tangible benefits, but then encourage them to move the needle themselves. Do not wait for academics, do not wait for lawyers, do not wait for reformers. You are the reformer, and you do that through your direct action.
It's interesting to think about the idea of a good law. Are our laws good? Are they doing their job? Are they being useful? And it's important to recognize that for a lot of people, working class people, poor people in this country, it doesn't matter what the law is. It comes down to who is enforcing it and how, or choosing not to enforce it. Like Max said, wage theft isn't legal. Sexual harassment, assault on the job isn't legal. There's laws against that, but it happens. It is certainly not legal to drive a Ford F-150 into a picket line and hit my friend Greg in Berkeley, Alabama, so that he's still getting gel injections in his knee a year later, but it happened. You're not supposed to, it's not legal to hit a burn barrel and smash it into his wife Amy, so she's still sore. And a year later, after that happened on the picket line, the state troopers all around who didn't see nothing. It is, in terms of legal framework, in terms of the government. We have a lot of great laws about occupational health and safety. There are laws that are supposed to help coal miners that work underground, mining the material needed to keep the lights on and the steel made. But there's still a massive spike in black lung among younger miners in Central Appalachia. There's laws that can help them, but the people in charge don't care. The bosses aren't enforcing it. MSHA doesn't have enough people to enforce the laws that exist, and so they're suffering. You can make all the laws you want, but if you don't have, the judges and the lawyers and the government, and fuck the cops, but there are all sorts of people. This is a labor conference. We know what side they're on. Let's not have no illusions about all that. But that's part of it too. You can make all the good laws you want, but figure out how to make sure they're actually enforced and carried out, and workers are actually protected and actually have access to them. That is the big part of the puzzle. That's what I want all you smart people to think about. Because I can't do that. I can just report it, and I can provide comfort to my friends when they get beat up on the picket line or their boss grabs them at work, like happened to me when I was 16, 17, 20, and you know how it goes. We can have the best intentions and the best legal minds and the best analysis, but if the people who need those protections, who need that recourse, don't have access to it, can't afford to even talk to somebody to explain it to them, are locked out of our labor laws, so they can't unionize and they can't call their union rep because they don't have one. If you're a sex worker whose labor is criminalized, who are you going to talk to if somebody assaults you? We can have all the good laws we want, but there's all this other stuff that needs to happen that doesn't happen, that isn't happening, to make them actually work for workers. And I don't have the answer to that, but I'd love to have people who might think about it more and figure out how we can actually make all these beautifully worded statutes and whatever it is y'all do all day. Like, I didn't finish college, I'm not pretending to be an academic, but I know what it's like to work and what it's like to be hurt with a job. I have a lot of friends who have that same experience, especially I spent a long time covering this coal miner strike in Alabama, Brookwood. That's kind of like my case study for thinking about this, thinking about the way the law is weaponized against workers. 1,000 coal miners on strike in rural Alabama, UMWA, United Mine Workers. one of the toughest unions this country's ever seen. They put everything into that strike. And the local judiciary put everything they had into crushing it, into helping the company more than that crush it. Local law enforcement, they certainly were helpful. They turned the other way while people were assaulting minors on the picket line, and they were able to send out court summons to people's wives for showing up to support. Well, they weren't there when people were being injured. There's a union organizer down there, a buddy of mine. He's currently facing 2 felonies because during one of those moments when someone's trying to drive a truck into a bunch of striking workers, he pulled out pepper spray. I don't think he broke the law, but the law says differently. So that's just a little bit of, I guess, on the ground perspective I want to bring to the discussion. I'm sure Max has a much more eloquent way of saying it. But those are just some things I think about when I think about the law, whether it's good, whether it's working, and whether it really matters.
Well, you're wearing the shirt with Cecil's quote on it, like, is that one of the big,
Sure.
one of the opening like stories that you reported on was like how the courts at the behest of Warrior Met filed an injunction that essentially not entirely but almost entirely neutralized the picket line, right?
You're supposed to have a right. You're supposed to have the right to strike in this country. It's one of those things you're supposed to be allowed to get away with. But how many picket lines have you seen surrounded by cops or broken up or busted up? In Brookwood, like Max was saying, these coal miners, they essentially lost their right to strike because, and I hate to say activist judges, because that's like a weird thing right now, but judges who had decidedly chosen a side to stand on when it came to that conflict, they made it impossible for these workers to strike, and that made it much harder for them to carry out the strike. It made it harder for them to chip away at the company. They went back to work last month and they don't have a contract. And it shouldn't have ended up like that if the laws had been on their side, or the people in charge of interpreting and handing down decisions on the laws had not had a political agenda, had not been turned against workers, had not been in bed with Kay Ivey, meanwhile, who would send state troopers out to oppress them. There's all these moving parts. It depends on where you're at, who you are, where you work. So when you talk about, I guess, the law as a concept, the rules that we're all supposed to live by, it's also subjective. It's also, I don't know how y'all do what you do because it's complicated, but it seems like now, as it has always been in this country, it never quite comes down on the worker side. And I think that's something that's important to keep in mind. Because if it's not there to protect workers, the working class, who is it there for? The rich dickheads at the top making our lives hell? If that's the case, we should probably change it.
We can assure.
Oh, yeah. It's.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a great quote by Cecil Roberts, president of the UMWA. It says, "The Constitution of the United States protects American citizens' rights to stand on the side of a picket line and call a scab a scab."
I'd love to hear from you on this. I mean, I know Kim, one of the things you were saying is, these laws actually working. And one of the things that Lenita and the Berkeley Worker Center worked on in a partnership with Boston College of Law is some research into whether laws are working. So I'd love to hear about that experience. And I mean, after that, we'll turn it over to everyone and open things up like that. Oh yeah, and then we'll do for sure.
So here about picket line, so I was just thinking, and how about myself? When you work on a private home that you work alone, how are you gonna pick it? So that's not a way to do that, right? So there is good laws, yes. So the domestic worker bill of rights that we worked and passed in 2014 and went into effect in 2015 is the most comprehensive in the country. But it's not working for the worker. So we just did this report that we worked with Boston College Law. 8 years after we passed the law, there's many workers and employees that don't know anything about the law. And the ones that knows, they pretend they don't know. So we work with the government agencies that are responsible to enforce the law. And one of them said, oh, this is not our responsibility. And it was very, very important for the workers that they asked us that it's nothing passed, they wanted those to pass, that was the one that talks about discrimination and sexual harassment. And MCAD, Massachusetts Commission Against Discrimination, is supposed to enforce this one. And when we interview them, they say, no, we don't enforce. So the law is good. The law is there for 8 years, but hasn't been enforced. So just last month, a domestic worker called us. She was working, wasn't get paid. She was going over some other issues at her workplace. So we opened a complaint. That's something that we can do at the worker center. So we don't have to. We don't need to find an attorney. We can just try to negotiate with the employer. And if it doesn't work, we can refer to the attorney general's office. So when we send a letter to the employer, a businessman went to my social media and sent me a direct message saying that they would sue me for extortion if I was continue to say that I would bring this to forward. And they have been communicating with this domestic worker in Portuguese through text message. And that day he sent her message in English saying that he would call immigration court. So there is a law. So we got in touch with the attorney general's office. I sent everything because even he was a businessman, he was not that smart because he put everything right. So I just had to print and send to the attorney general's office for the investigator and the attorney that was taking care of the case. But this was last month and I didn't hear anything else. So the law is there, so we know we enforce, we know that it's violation, we reach the violation, we get everything, name, address, telephone number, anything, everything that they need. And we handle to those who enforce, and sometimes even that the worker doesn't get the benefit of the law. So that is just one of many cases. So we work with domestic workers, and most of the workers that come to our office are domestic workers and construction workers. And the construction workers as well, now in the domestic worker, they feel like if they complain or if they say anything, they disposable, the employer just fire them and get somebody else. And they use like the new arrivals, so they're trying to get the new arrivals because they can pay less, they know less about the laws, and they can take more advantage of them. Another quick case that I want to share is about this construction worker that complained about safety. He was working and I guess the ladder was like very bad shape. He complained and the employer told him, why don't you get your pal and use it to hold you up there for a little monkey. That's what the employer told him. So he filed a complaint, he came to us, we helped him to file a complaint with MCAG. When they send a letter to the employer sent a letter with a copy of his passport to his family, all the way in Brazil, and say, pal, your central receipt your brother should back off. So he was really scared. So because they was able to found the family, but they filed a complaint with the police in Brazil, they filed, and they came back to us, we filed with the Department of Labor, and they was able to investigate the case, do a restraining order against the employer. So, and they found out there was many other workers that was in a situation that they wasn't getting paid for the work they was doing. They was not getting paid overtime. There was worker discrimination. They was able to get this worker compensation of over $100,000 that was owed to him, and we was able to help him with immigration because his visa was expiring. He was in a visa, so he was able to apply for for a chief visa and U visa for him. So there is laws, but this is just one worker. So we don't know what happened to other workers that was work with him, because the only one that comes to us that we are able to support, but we don't know about the others. They was able to get paid, but we don't know about this time, we don't know about discrimination and anything about that.
All right, so.
And I have some samples if people are interested to read, so we have some samples of this stuff.
Before we ended up having questions, I asked everyone before we started, I mean, like, what's one thing you wanna make sure that folks hear? Hear about, listen to, and Max said workers' actual voices and stories. So I think he's gonna share a couple of excerpts of interviews.
Awesome, thank you, yes, and again, apologies to Sandra for throwing that curveball 20 minutes before the panel. Sandra, in 1 sec, if we could tee up the iron workers interview that starts at 26:22. Before I get there though, I just wanted to say 2 quick things. One, last month I was on a similar panel at Penn with the great Wendy Brown, Chandra Kumingika from Rutgers, organizing hero of mine, Reverend Dr. Liz Harris from the Poor People's Campaign, having a similar conversation. I want to make the point here that I made there. When we're talking about what you can do, it's not just what you can do on the academic side. What I really stress to folks there is that you need to think in action. And in fact, it will benefit your thinking to engage yourself with the ongoing struggles. At the time, I chided everyone in the audience. I was like, there's a picket line at Temple University across the city. Get your ass over there and show support, right? Talk to them about what they're going through. Then have that inform your thinking. We can do that right now. My alma mater, my old union, the Graduate Employees Organization at the University of Michigan, is on strike right now. And the university administration, like it did in the fall of 2020, is trying to weaponize the courts to break the strike rather than come to the bargaining table and actually pay workers a living wage. The university filed a ULP against the union yesterday. They're probably going to file an injunction like they did in 2020. You should stand it. Speak out about that. Condemn what the university administration is doing. Offer whatever resources you can offer to the union to help fight that. You can, because like this is also a way that you can tangibly help people who are doing it the right way, who are, I think Willie made a great point that like I think a lot of workers are realizing like that they're running up against the limits of what law can do for them, because even when they do it the right way, the ruling class can always flip over the chessboard and change the rules. Because that's what's fucking happening right now too, right? Instead of like raise the national minimum wage, right? Or like strengthen collective bargaining. What's happening in states like Arkansas and Iowa and Ohio is that they are rolling back child labor laws, or they're saying, let's raise the retirement age. Like let's undercut the like existing workforce however we can instead of pay people what they deserve. What are we gonna do about that? Like, I don't know. We need your help, right? But like, I know a lot of workers, and we're gonna play some clips of folks who have again done it the right way. And I need you to see what it looks like when they get fucked by the law. Is the law good? I don't know. I always think of the famous Kafka parable in the middle of the trial. Who has access to the law? Is the law good? Probably. But like anything, that question means nothing if we do not have an analysis of power and how power shapes the playing field here. I want to show you what it looks like to play on an unequal board here when one side has the power, the other doesn't. So last year, I interviewed folks at G&D Integrated who, after a majority of employees had formally expressed interest in unionizing, this is a transportation, logistics, warehousing, and supply chain company in central Illinois. They marched on their boss together to demand recognition of the union. Those demands were not met. They filed for an LRB. They voted overwhelmingly for a union. Then for months, the retaliation started. And I want to play one clip of what that retaliation looks like, and then I want to show you what the final nail in the coffin was for these workers.
This is what it was like for you leading up to that terrible day.
Me personally, I didn't see the layoffs coming. I just figured, they were going to do what they're going to do to try to get us to break. But some of the things he was personally, Tony was doing, like when somebody would go to the bathroom, if they were gone for too long or whatever, if even if he didn't see them leaving, if he just, you know, came out and seen you were gone, however long he was out there, he'd go, I seen you, I couldn't get my camera out fast enough. I was going to take a picture of him. He was looking underneath the stalls in the bathroom. And he would, like in the summertime, it's 115 degrees in there. He would shut the air conditioner off in the bathroom.
Okay. Can we now go to 3154? So after months of shit like that, of clear retaliation against workers that they didn't deal with that stuff until after they made their desire for a union known, right? And so that kind of harassment, that surveillance, all of the kind of shit that they were facing culminated in G&D integrated saying, you know what, we're closing the shop. Bye. And I asked John, what was it like for you when you got that news? This is what he told me.
I can't really say so much for the coworkers, but it took a toll on my family because my wife's got a good job, but I was the money and it's gone now. I just got to do unemployment now, try to make money where I can. And they fucked us. That's all I can say without getting all emotional.
Can we pause that, please? Okay, and then finally, I want to play a clip of Brandy McNeese, who was lead organizer at the unionization effort in Augusta, Maine, where workers made history by becoming the first Chipotle store to file for an NLRB election in June of last year. Then the day that Brandy and her co-workers were preparing to attend an NLRB hearing to discuss the upcoming election, the day that that hearing was going to happen, they got the news that Chipotle was permanently closing the store. And I asked Brandy to tell me what it was like receiving that news. And so this begins at 1644.
So the day of the hearing, you know, we had been waiting already for a really long time. We had hoped that it was going to be, you know, we're going to file, they're going to disagree, but we're still going to get in there and get our date. And, you know, we were thinking like maybe the middle of August if we really had to wait a long time. You know, and we had heard about other union busting stuff that had happened between the filing and the election. And we just didn't think that them shutting us down like that was going to happen. So I was traveling to meet with the lawyer to sit in on the hearing. We were meeting, it was all on Zoom. So we were meeting in town, like less than an hour away. And I was on the drive and I started getting these messages in our group chat saying stuff like, you know, they're going to shut down the store and this, and we just got this email and I hadn't checked my email. I was driving, but I'm responding to these messages because everybody seems really like they had given up. And I was like, no, guys, don't say stuff like that. You know, I thought they were reacting to the hearing. Oh, it's too late. We're not going to make it. And I'm trying to like hold them up. And it was like fistfuls of sand, you know, like, no, guys, it's okay. It's okay. And it's running through my fingers as I'm realizing that like they had all gotten that email and somebody had said, no, Brandy, we got an email and they're shutting us down. And I think about it now and I get really emotional, but at that point I was just angry. I was so angry. You know, we had stood up because they had mistreated us, that we were tired of watching our family get kicked around. And then they just stepped on us. You know, they went from like abusing us to just total, like, how are we going to feed our families? And how dare you just pick up and walk away? Like, we did everything right. There are rules because there's a process in place. People have talked about this. There's been decisions. Nobody is above the law. Like, how could you?
Hey, man, we can stop there. So I don't know what we're gonna do, but I need everyone to understand that these are the stakes of what we do or don't do. Thank you.
With that, we'll open it up for questions, when, just raise your hands, we'll call on folks and please let us know who you are.
I deeply appreciated this panel. It was really lovely to be grounded and to be able to think in such dire terms about what it is that we each do every day and how we either contribute to or exacerbate or help to build solidarity in the movements that you all are leading and fighting. So thank you. I had just a very specific question for Willie. I really appreciated your comments and, think a lot about misclassification also, and wanted to hear what, the UPS and FedEx are sort of the prototypical sides of the misclassification coin. And of course, the FedEx execs actually originally came from UPS and figured out how to exploit and extract in these, awful ways. I wonder how the Teamsters, if you have any sense of how different locals are dealing with the rise of digitalized allocation software and the surveillance that comes with it, like what kind of contract language you're thinking about, how you are approaching the surveillance that you mentioned that happens as a seemingly ancillary part of these sort of tailorized digital systems that are being brought to UPS.
Absolutely, and I can say that we have always been in a position where we've had to negotiate this from the standpoint of discipline and trying to use contract language to prevent employers from using that in a disciplinary hearing or any type of manner. And unfortunately, that's where I believe, we've generally been limited to. When we're talking about surveillance, most times employers are surveilling, in my opinion, and when we say surveillance, I think it's also important to understand that we're talking about surveillance, we're also talking about productivity monitoring. That is a significant part of this. And so what that does is allow employers to couch union busting efforts in matters of safety and health and efficiency. And I really appreciate also what the NLRB General Counsel Jennifer Abruzzo is doing with her recent memo, in which she's attacking the surveillance practices of employers. And I think what's critical there, what's going to allow us particularly moving forward to utilize that, is that understanding that the right for employees to engage in confidential conversations is a right in itself, and that we can negotiate based on that right. That is a counterbalance to health and safety concerns, which we certainly do appreciate as well, but also primarily the efficiency conversations and the union busting conversations. I think also what's very important about that point, however, is also understanding that the only way that employees are protected from the practice right now is through a collective bargaining agreement. In the organizing context, they have no recourse to combat these methods of surveillance. A part of the General Counsel's memo, she also is, in my opinion, presented something that is going to go a long way in order to preventing pretext. And that is the disclosure requirement in regards to, even if we do not find harmful surveillance, employees should be afforded the opportunity to know what standard am I being held to when you collect this information, how are you using it, how can it potentially impact me moving forward. Then at least I can understand that if I'm on a workforce of 100 individuals and you tell me that I'm in the bottom third, that I actually have the data systems to back that up, and I don't know that you're actually just using that without disclosing it to terminate me because I'm actually a union supporter. And so I think that in getting that information also goes a long way, which I think is why that is an excellent step that she has put forward. But yes, I think that it's a priority for us now. We're seeing all types of new technological apparatuses. Give you, for example, some employers are wanting to put what I deem shock collars on employees. It's a vest that buzzes when an individual moves the wrong way. But in reality, what they want to do is be able to waive any liability as it concerns potential injury moving forward, because then they can say that, oh, well, it buzzed 10 times while you were lifting that box. It's actually you that was performing the job in the wrong manner. And so again, when that is approached to a workforce, when that concept is brought to a workforce that is again not organized and does not at least have an opportunity to maybe have someone else facilitate with them, it's just enforced on them and then they're subject to it and there's no recourse. And again, then it becomes a situation like we were speaking about earlier, whereas it's just another opportunity for employers to be able to target collective action or individual members that want to engage in collective action. So yes.
And if you don't believe Willie, there's an episode for that. A couple weeks ago, I interviewed workers at an Amazon facility in California who were trying to unionize with the Independent Amazon Labor Union. They talk about this vest. So if you want to hear from workers describe it, it's there for you.
So a lot of the stories that we heard, both your personal stories and the stories that you related to us about the various groups and communities and individuals you're working with, seem to have approached, maybe less the Teamsters generally, but seem to have approached unionization and labor organizing as a last resort. Do you see outcomes and strategies looking different when engaging with labor organizing is not a desperate last attempt to pull yourself out of an oppressive situation, but is seen as a productive general tool? And I don't know what the difference would be. I'm just wondering whether you're observing different approaches and different experiences in those spaces.
Again, I think for my purposes, and in part related to the comments that I was communicating earlier, unions need to be thinking proactively about how we can also get the results we need, and in part using some of the same strategies that companies use, whether it be looking at how we structure our organizations to understand who actually has the financial capital, who's making the decision making, and use that as a mechanism by which we can still take action. You know, I say from just a practical example, I personally believe that any group that wishes to unionize, the second that they have the majority support, instead of filing an election, they should actually just go strike immediately. They should strike immediately. And by striking immediately, that forces the employer to be in a situation where, while that may be an unlawful strike, they can negotiate with us at the table in regards to remedying any different outcome that may have come down that obviously will be a favor to them. And then workers can still be put back to work and put back in the same place that they were without waiting 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 months, giving the employer time to essentially engage in bad faith negotiating, if we can call it negotiating, and thus just terminate and erode the workforce over that time and understanding. And again, for them, it is a cost of business. So for us, maybe we should also look at strike liability as a cost of business and look at how we can, again, maneuver our finances to make sure that, you know, we're having an impact that is not detrimental to the national union and scope, but can give workers, particularly in those local areas, the remedies that they need.
It's very IWW vibe. I got my red card. But just to say, just in terms of the folks that I talked to and covered over the years, I think it's less that folks see unionizing as kind of a last resort, like, oh, we've tried everything, there's nothing else we can do, we have to try this. I think so many people just don't even know it's an option. And because some people, it isn't an option because of their jobs, but for most workers, you can unionize, you can talk about the money you make, you can stand up to your boss. Like, there are so many rights that workers have that I think they just don't know. Because who's gonna, unless you grow up in a union family or in like a very just labor friendly environment, you're not gonna know, your boss isn't gonna tell you. And so many folks that I talk to who are beginning to organize, beginning to unionize, they're really stoked, they're really excited. Because they didn't think that they would get a chance to participate. They would get a chance to build power in that way. I think so much of it is an education gap. And like, that's what I saw when we organized that Vice back when I was doing all that. So again, so many people were super into it once they realized, oh, we're allowed. We can do that. Unions aren't just for iron workers or construction workers or people in Detroit. Like everybody can organize more or less. That's amazing. And we also just shout out to the Harvard Grad Student Union and everyone who makes this place work. But yeah, I think it's much of it is just people not knowing what is possible. And that's our job as people who are academics and professionals and communicators and media people to tell people like, no, this is for you too.
Well, for our community, this is not the reality. So we know we have many workers, skilled workers, construction workers that does an amazing job that they cannot be unionized. They haven't tried. I myself have been talked with the carpenter unions, talked with the paintings unions for those workers, introduce them. And then first of all, you have to come to a meeting first Monday of the first Monday of the month. You have to fill out a form, you have to give your driver's license. There is nothing that doesn't have driver's license. Now we passed the law, so I hope this is gonna be one less obstacle for them to do it. But there is some rules on the union that they don't unionize the individual. You have to be a company. And we have these small companies that has the owner and 2 or 3 other workers. They have to pay $20,000 to first join, and then they would only get job through the union. So for those workers that they can just be getting credential workers and then they just do a house here or there and keep working, they're not gonna be sitting down for 2 months. And a small business employer paying those 2 or 3 workers for 2 months without having a job. So the rules have to change if it is if it is for everyone. So I don't think they have the skills. They really want to know, of course, do you want to get paid $17 an hour or $30 an hour plus benefit? Of course, you're gonna pick the second option, but it's not available.
I would just say, God, what an honor it is to be on this panel. I would just say in closing, it's a mix. I hear from folks in kind of all different sides of this. Some who are very much at the end of their rope. New York City taxi drivers were literally on a hunger strike last year because they had been so thoroughly taken advantage of and were facing financial ruin, right? And thank God they got the relief, some of the relief that they need, but still not enough. But like that is like a last kind of resort. You know, so even like the folks that I played the clips for you, like the guys at G&D Integrated LLC, like they did like their job, but they were seriously concerned about the lack of safety protocols, and they're working with multi-ton pieces of metal floating around. If that falls on someone, that's it, they're done. So you know, it really is a mix, but I think one thing just to kind of build on what Kim said that I'm hearing that I think is really positive is there are a lot of especially younger workers who are making the connection that I never did. When I was at the warehouse, when I was at the factories, when I was at a Barnes & Noble, when I was a pizza delivery guy, if you hated your job, you had 2 options: stay and take it or quit and find another job. I never knew there was a secret third thing. Right. And what is so heartening to me is to hear so many Starbucks workers, grad students, workers at nonprofits say, we like a lot of our job. We like the people, right? You heard Brandy at Chipotle say, we are a family. We fought so hard for this because we care for each other and we didn't want to leave. But we knew that we also couldn't make this work if we were constantly understaffed, if like we were not getting like, you know, the equipment fixed because it's dangerous, yada, yada, yada. So we did everything right. And this is how Chipotle responded. I've heard similar things from, like I said, a lot of graduate students right now. This is going back to the whole, the bosses will flip over the chessboard if they don't get their way, and where we can all be useful. I recently interviewed grad student workers at the Duke University Grad Student Union. and adjunct and tenure track faculty at Rutgers. Please support them however you can. Rutgers, I mean, they're going on strike for the first time in school history. This is huge. You can do something to support that. You can also do something to reach out to the Duke Grad Student Union, give them resources that they can like use, because right now, not only is the Duke administration refusing to acknowledge the union, they are flipping the chessboard over. They vowed to go to the NLRB to try to overturn the 2016 ruling that confirmed graduate students' right to unionize at private universities. So they want to undo everything. They want to undo the Harvard Union here, U Chicago, my alma mater, Johns Hopkins students who just unionized. They want to fuck everybody. We should be pissed about that. What are we doing about that? Are we at least condemning publicly what the Duke University administration is doing? No, but we can. We can do something about this. And I want to just end on a positive note. Going to Willie's point about how, in fact, we can be creative about this. And there are people who are. Check out the Union of Southern Service Workers in the South. This is a very notoriously anti-union place with a workforce that has tried and failed to unionize because the law is stacked against them for a lot of racist and sexist reasons. So they're not waiting around anymore. They're kind of like basically trying to do a sectoral, let's all get together and go on strike to get the shit that we need, even if we're not a formal union. Also, Google the Najuan Support Network in Toronto. They're some of the coolest organizers I've ever seen. They're largely Punjabi immigrant student workers who are working on student visas, sending money back home. Because of their immigration status, they are hyper exploitable. They can't afford to live in Toronto, so they have to work under the table, which means that they can get, you know, taken advantage of left and right, and they can also have their immigration status like dangled over their head. So you're in a very tight spot there. So what do? They can't unionize, they can't like kind of take the proper channels, and so they effectively turn the community into a union. And so you have grandmas, you have aunts, uncles, kids, everyone marching on the boss with signs with the boss's face saying this guy's a wage thief. They're bringing in tactics that Indian farmers used during the massive history-making protests that we saw a couple of years ago. And that's kind of working, because it turns out bosses don't like having chalk written in front of their house saying a wage thief lives here, right? So like, I guess just think creatively, help us out however you can, because it's a dogfight right now and we need everyone.
Right, I think our time's up. So thank you all so much for being here. I'm gonna take with me so many of the things that y'all said. What did you say? What was the Kafka thing? Who has access?
Who has access?
Who has access to the law? I think that applies to academia as well. Is academia a good thing? Who has access to it? And so again, I just want to say, like, thank you to all of everyone here on this panel for educating us, and thank you again to this LPE space that I think is also changing who has access to academia, which hopefully will mean that we are more useful to partners in the struggle. So let's thank all of our panelists.